Hello everybody and welcome to a review that I've been so excited to get out to, guys. This is the review for the new DC film, Justice League. I was so excited for this movie and I can't wait to tell you guys my thoughts on the film. Of course, I'm going to give you a little bit of a rundown of the background of this film in case you don't really know what went down with the production of this film. So as you may or may not know, this movie was directed by Zack Snyder and Joss Whedon. Yes, the same Joss Whedon who directed the film The Avengers. And the first Avengers, that is. So Zack Snyder went through a personal tragedy, so they brought good old Joss Whedon in to complete what is now being called a majority of this film. So obviously there's footage from Snyder and from Whedon. On top of that, the Warner Brothers CEO decided that the film had to be exactly 2 hours long. So after a lot of reshoots, after a lot of cuts from the studio, this movie, if you can even call it that, because it's been so recut from its original take, has been basically kind of turned into a product. That said, it's a film in theaters, and I'm going to review it for what it is, regardless of the background of what happened down during the production. That said, I want you guys to know, before going into this movie, that this is what happened to this movie. It was really much treated like a product. It was very done over and over again with different visions, very different people working on the same movie. As you may or may not know as well, Joss Whedon is a very light-hearted, kind of fun superhero director versus Zack Snyder, who brings a far more darker, sometimes more emotional, philosophical side to his superhero films, a la Batman v Superman. So, without further ado, let's get right into the review, and I'll tell you what I liked about this film and what I didn't like about the film. First of all, let's talk about, Zack Snyder's vision versus Joss Whedon's vision in this film. Because it's very evident that there are two visions at play in this film, and interestingly, the Joss Whedon one, in my opinion, overpowers the Zack Snyder one. Now, is that a good or bad thing? Well, here's what I have to say about Joss Whedon and Zack Snyder as directors and as it applies to this film. I think that Joss Whedon is a great director. I think he perfectly captures the sort of dynamism and energy that is related with these superheroes. Even if he is typically noted as a Marvel guy, I think he brought something interesting to the table with Justice League, with his vision. All the scenes that distinctly feel like Joss Whedon. And now, of course, we can only guess which one is Whedon and which one's Snyder, but when you watch the film, you'll see that it's a very clear-cut difference. So from what I can tell, those scenes that are directed by Whedon do work in their own place. So I really like the energy that Whedon brings to his films, and especially in Justice League, the scenes that he does have that sense of lightheartedness, have that sense of a team working together, and those scenes do work. Now, Zack Snyder. I love that director quite a bit. Now, the thing with Zack Snyder is that he has a really good job of capturing the mythos, the real mythos of these characters, the DC characters. He has a very good understanding of these characters, partially because he and his wife are basically the people who launched the entire DC extended universe. So he has a very good grasp on the mythos and the very grandness of these characters. He understands their moral codes. He understands their emotions sometimes a little bit better, and he understands the philosophy of being a superhero far better than does Joss Whedon. So that said, both directors have their weaknesses when it comes to these to these particular group of superheroes. So what happens when you put these two visions together? Well, ideally, it would have worked like puzzle pieces. Whatever weaknesses that Joss Whedon had were covered by Snyder, and whatever Snyder had was covered by Whedon. But unfortunately, the film is absolutely nothing like that. It's really just a complete mash of everything. It's a complete chaotic mash. It's not a very, very, very great film, guys. That's what I'm hinting at already. There are things that I do like about the film, which I'll get into later, but in terms of uniformity, there is none. In fact, the movie feels very slapdash, with two visions competing against each other, and on top of that, you can constantly feel this sort of studio presence where they're trying to make this movie very, very applicable to the masses and make it so that every general audience member can have fun with the movie. Now, of course, when you go out to make a movie like Snyder did with Justice League, since he is the original guy, you come with your own vision, and then you slap on 2 or 3 visions on top of that. That's where the issues began. And in fact, if you look up many reports, say that Snyder was already being pressured for his vision for Justice League to be changed by the studio far before Joss Whedon even came in. So what my biggest issue with this film is this basically competing 3 different visions that never come together. And ultimately the film's editing also takes a hit because of that. Because there are so much weird kind of jumps in the screenplay, the editing never comes, and the editing as well as the screenplay never come together to create a uniform film. Now, those are some of the worst parts of Justice League that I just went over. A very, very slapdash, kind of weirdly put together film. But there gets kind of worse, because in terms of the screenplay, we also get a villain, Steppenwolf. It's no spoiler there. And Steppenwolf as a villain has got to be one of the weakest villains I've ever seen in my life in any superhero film ever. Because the screenplay has so many different visions, the screenplay is basically jumping around a billion times, so there's no real time for Steppenwolf to develop as a villain. Now, as I said, there could have been scenes that were shot that gave more backstory to Steppenwolf, or even a purpose, honestly, because he's just kind of there in the mix of the film, and it feels so out of place and so strange for him to be there that the movie just kind of loses focus, and I'm really unsure half the time why there even needed to be this forming of a team of a Justice League to fight kind of, well, who is honestly a bit of a lame, disposable, boring villain. I mean, I never cared for the guy. He's not menacing. His CG face looks extremely weird, and he was just one of the worst villains I've ever seen in a superhero film. So when you have a villain that's so disposable, and trying to give him a backstory in like 2 minutes isn't going to work very well, as you may know. And it doesn't work for Justice League. The villain is very boring, very disposable, and just feels like he's just been placed like a sticker on something. I hated having him there. Every scene he was in, I was like, please just cut back to the Justice League, because he was so boring, and I did not care for the villain at all. In terms of characters now, and this is kind of where we go into some of the good parts, or at least better parts, of Justice League. First of all, I want to talk about, and I'm looking over here in my notes, is kind of the lack of character development within the superheroes themselves. As you know, DC hasn't had that time to mature like Marvel has, with a bunch of movies leading up to what is now going to be Infinity War for Marvel. Instead, DC decided to go a really strange route by doing Man of Steel, Batman v Superman, Suicide Squad, Justice League. I mean, they did not give anyone time to process anything. Also Wonder Woman before Justice League. But basically, in general, they didn't give a lot of members in the Justice League their own movie, which is something that Marvel does. From a different standpoint, kind of going away from just the review in Justice League, you know, and I've explained this on Movie News, you can see the last episode where I was kind of talking about it, is that DC as a company has done really weird stuff with how they want to put their films out in what release order. So there's something that's a whole different story. But in terms of the film kind of suffers because of that, especially because they reshot it and cut it open, the entire film, and changed a lot of things. We get really strange character introductions. People just kind of show up, almost. There are a couple of recruitment scenes that just kind of happen, and then they just show up, and then the movie goes. It's a really weirdly put together film. But what made this movie for me, and I mean made it for me, was these actors and were these characters. Because the actors playing these characters, Cyborg, Superman, Batman, Wonder Woman, Aquaman, Flash, they were so perfectly cast and so perfectly acted that feeling of weird slapdash character introductions, kind of a strange screenplay, didn't really affect me as much, because I was so invested in these superheroes because of basically the actors that were playing them. They were so believable as these superheroes that there wasn't for a second that I felt I was watching an actor. I mean, the acting was to that level for me. As well as just casting in general. These actors really looked the part of their counterpart superhero. Whether it be Ben Affleck, who I loved in Batman v Superman, and was the only good thing about Batman v Superman, who does an incredible job as Batman here, as well as Gal Gadot, who has been a constant standout, of course, in the DCEU, who's still a standout in Justice League. And newcomers like, Ray Fisher, like Jason Momoa, like Ezra Miller, who perfectly embody their character. And ultimately, this is part of it, but ultimately it is true that when you have a group of superheroes as classic as this group, with Batman, Superman, Wonder Woman, these superheroes have been around for a long, long time. People always have respected and loved these characters, and for me, because the casting for this film is so good, I still continue to have that love and respect for these actors. Did they deserve a better film? Yes. Do they deserve better people behind the DC, corporate doors? Yes. But when these characters come together on screen, I can't help but at least partially enjoy myself for having them be on the screen together, especially with such good casting. That said, man, does DC and Warner Brothers have a lot to figure out for the future, because this movie had some issues. I mean, think of it from the editing standpoint, the screenplay standpoint. There were so many weird issues of this film, and it's because of the kind of corporate stuff that happened, and also partially because of those two mixed up visions, that it never comes together. That, you have those Snyder scenes which you like as a Snyder scene, and those Whedon scenes you like as a Whedon scene, but they don't mesh together at all. There's no uniformity in this film whatsoever. So you're kind of just going to this film to enjoy the characters. And in terms of the special effects as well, you get some really strange CG moments in this film. But one thing that I've always praised DC films for, and I will continue to praise, is their action scenes, despite how, weird, kind of murky they may be because of the CGI and because of weird edited out mustaches. If you don't know, Henry Cavill, who had a mustache in Mission Impossible, had to come back for reshoots, and they CGI'd his mustache out. So regardless of all the weird CGI, the action scenes are still very entertaining because they have such a strong sense of physicality within them. I really love the fist-to-fist, kind of action that DC has kind of become a staple for almost. They have very physical action scenes, which I love, and that's why the action scenes are so engaging to me. So overall, Justice League is of course not a well put together film, but as I said, the characters and the actors made up for those flaws so much that they were almost carrying the movie for me. They were what I wanted to see. Every time I saw one of these characters, they were so believable, so real, and felt like they were straight out of the DC Comics world, that I was actually invested in the movie, not necessarily for the battle against Steppenwolf, but for these actors playing these characters. And, perhaps I'm being a little too lenient on this film for that reason, but the truth is that these actors really made up the film for me, despite, all the flaws in the film, that to the point where I kind of began to almost ignore those flaws. That said, they're still there, but ultimately, when you're watching this movie, you're enjoying the characters' the actors' performances and the characters so much that you almost begin to forget some of the flaws of the film. That said, of course, I am a critic and I have to look at those things. And for that reason, I'm going to be giving this movie a lower score than it actually probably would have deserved if it were a good film with these same characters. No, it's not a good film. It's not a perfect film at all. It's not even good quality. I mean, this is basically a film that for me will be getting a B-. So that's my grade for this film, is a B-. It has a lot to do. I think DC and Warner Brothers have a lot of figuring out to do, especially with such a talented cast. I would hate to see this cast go to waste somehow. If they did like a reboot or something, because they really messed up with this movie in terms of the way they constructed it. I think that people still want to see this cast. I think if you even go online or anywhere in the fan community, usually no one is really against the cast. Everyone likes these actors. It's the films that they have a problem with, and ultimately the films are kind of not becoming the director's work necessarily as much as they're becoming corporate products from Warner Brothers and DC. So Justice League definitely felt like a corporate product and a kind of weird mix of visions. But I had fun with the characters. I enjoyed some of the action sequences, and even though towards the end of the film I got kind of bored because I really did not care for that final battle against Steppenwolf because he was so just disposable and boring, the middle part of the film and kind of the beginning parts where we were getting these characters and they were fighting together was interesting to me, and I did enjoy those parts. But ultimately, the fact that a Justice League movie, which we've been waiting for, fans have been waiting for years, was the fact that it was so disposable, so forgettable, that I can just barely remember the significant parts of the plot is really sad. Because for an event film like this, for Justice League, it should have been amazing. It really should have blown me away. And it didn't. It was horribly mediocre. And say what I will about the characters and everything, ultimately, the film did not deliver the way a Justice League film should have. So I wanted to know what people in the community's thoughts were. So I went to Facebook and asked some of my friends to tell me what they thought about Justice League. So I have my phone open here, and I'm going to be talking a little bit about what they had to say about the film, and then kind of just talk a little bit about if I agree or disagree with their views. And first of all, I want to thank all the people who sent in their reviews, and I'm really excited to read these and tell you guys what I thought about them. So let me just pull those up, and then we'll be talking about those right now. So first one comes from Elisa, and she writes, I personally liked it. Okay, quote, I personally liked it. The characters I found most interesting were Cyborg, Aquaman, and the Flash. However, since Justice League did not have several years of development for their characters' backstory like Marvel, the new characters' backstories and intros seemed a bit rushed. However, these characters are so good, I'd probably go see their future films. The villain, I felt, was very rushed and barely introduced in Batman vs. Superman. He seemed to come out of nowhere. There could have been some good setup for him, or at least the boxes in Wonder Woman. I loved Superman's character. They made him more classic and comic booky, if you know what I mean. I loved how Justice League had plenty of color, and I actually had fun watching it. I know DC's style is dark and that's Snyder's style, but it was simply a refreshing change. Ezra Miller did a surprisingly good job in his role of the Flash. I personally didn't watch much of the TV show, and I thought Grant Gustin would be the only Flash in my mind, but Miller was pretty good. Perfect casting for Aquaman and Cyborg, very funny film. And then 7 out of, I think she means 10 stars. So, here's what I have to say about Lisa's review, and kind of ties into what I think about the film too, because I really agree with the fact that I enjoyed the characters. That was one of the highlights for me of the film, was the actors playing those characters. Yes, the villain was rushed, I absolutely agree. In terms of Snyder's style, I actually felt that Snyder's style was not very much present in this film, as much as I would have liked to have it in there. I'm personally a big both Snyder and Whedon fan, and for me, you know, when those two came together, it didn't fit together the way I would have wanted to make a good uniform piece of work. It felt very, very weird and very rushed and kind of just mixed together, and it didn't come together for me. In terms of Ezra Miller, I love Ezra Miller as the Flash. I think he does an incredible job as him. I think, however, at the same time, that the Flash was used as a comic relief perhaps a little more often than necessary. Same with Batman. A lot of people have been saying that, you know, he was a little bit too funny. I think it was okay for Batman, specifically, to be a little bit funny from time to time, especially in the kind of Justice League setting. I don't think I want him to be making a lot of jokes in a film like, you know, Batman v Superman, where he doesn't actually. So I think in terms of Justice League setting, the jokes worked, and I enjoyed the funny nature of the film. I think that's more of a Joss Whedon thing. But yeah, I enjoyed the comic relief, personally. I don't think it overbeared the film too much. That said, you can tell that the comic relief has been put in there kind of by the Warner Brothers studio, and I'm still kind of interested in seeing what Snyder would have wanted. So, now we're going to go to a review by Richard. The CGI was not always very good, and the opening scene with Batman was silly, but other than that, I liked it. Okay, so here's what I have to say about the CGI. Yes, the CGI was insanely bad, but as I said, I really like the action scenes, regardless of the CGI and how it is. I actually like the action scenes, the physicality that those action scenes have, I think is really makes for a very engaging film. The opening scene with Batman, weird scene, yeah, but it kind of, for me, worked almost because it kind of throws you into the film, not a lot of setup, which is also, it's weird that it throws you into the film that way. But for me, it kind of worked. It felt like a comic book opening almost, where Batman's already fighting crime and then he discovers something's weird. But following the sequence of events was, after that, was really, really strange to me as well. So yeah, I guess it doesn't really work in the context of the film. So I agree with you in that aspect. Okay, and then our last review will be coming from Joe, who said, I loved it because I didn't go in with the expectation that it would be perfect and fulfill all my impossible to meet expectations. If I had anything to say, if I had to say anything negative, is that it starts off too slowly with a lot of action in the second half, and I would have preferred if they dispersed it more evenly. Yeah, I think so. I think I agree, especially because in the first half of the film, we get a lot of stuff with Lois Lane and Amy Adams that I did not care for. For me, that character, in this entire cast, Amy Adams, who I think is a great actress, as Lois Lane, has got to be the most irritating character for me, personally. I feel like she's just kind of there and she has no purpose in this entire DCEU. I'm hoping to see her do better stuff and cooler stuff, but I definitely don't see her purpose. As for the action in the second half, I totally agree with you with that. By the time the ending was coming around and that big climax sequence was happening, I really didn't care for the battle because I didn't care about Steppenwolf. So I think it goes, twofold, because I didn't care about the villain, so I didn't care about the battle, so I didn't care about that final action sequence. I was like, okay, I'm done now. I've seen the characters. They were fun for an hour and a half even maybe, but now I'm done. I really just did not care about that battle against Steppenwolf, and I was like, whatever, let's finish this out. So I definitely agree that the final, too much packing of action towards the end. So yeah, in terms of evenly dispersing stuff, yeah, the movie needed evening out for sure. Like, there was way too many bumps in the road here, needed to be smoothed out. But yeah, I think it's a B- film. So I mean, it was fun to watch for the characters, but guys, this movie, it's messy. So let me know what you guys think about Justice League in the comments down below. Be sure to like, comment, subscribe, all that good stuff. And I'll be having more reviews out to you guys soon. Thanks again to everyone who submitted their reviews through Facebook to me. It was really fun to get to know what other people thought about this highly, highly controversial film, amongst the fandom at least. So yeah, guys, thanks for watching this review, and I'll see you guys next time.